always grateful to have the opportunity to interact with Kavod, as it is one of the jewels of our Denver community, period. Not just the Jewish community, as I have come to appreciate since starting at Senior Housing Options. It is a model for a lot of other senior organizations. And I've had the opportunity as part of my research in my new role to be able to talk with several staff members. And I applaud what you've all been able to do in your shift these last 5 or 6 months. Let me share a little bit about my project, the Spirit of Wellness, before I launch into my presentation today. I retired a little more than 2 years ago from the Congregational Rabbinate and classroom teaching, which was my first career, to be able to pursue something different, although not 360-degree shift from what I was doing, but in a different industry, in a different field. And in wanting to hold on to some of my skill set and be able to continue doing the things that I love to do, I created this outlet called the Spirit of Wellness, which in many ways feeds my own needs. It's a resource vault and communication space for faith-based personal resiliency. And in my own journey, I have discovered the need to reach inward for something extra to sustain me through my steps through life. And while taking care of one's body is essential to health, I would argue that we all need something more soulful to get us through moments of trial, challenge, and disappointment. And so it's through that that I started my first year of Spirit of Wellness when I was still in my previous job. I worked for 2 years doing health insurance, customer service at Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield. I dedicated the first year of Spirit of Wellness to the Jewish holidays. And I did a little bit of a community speaking tour at various synagogues and houses of worship, not that were not Jewish. And I wrote a series of blogs and articles and had a class this past summer on the holidays. And with the passing of the first anniversary of Spirit of Wellness, I've moved into an interest area that's focused on Shabbat. Concurrently with today's presentation, I'm also teaching a 7-week class in the evenings entitled, it's the same title. It's A Taste of Eternity, and all about how we move through the various avenues of Shabbat and try to see it as a way of replenishing and restoring. And in addition to the Shabbat focus, I've also done some resilience coaching for those who felt isolated by the COVID-19 pandemic that has touched us all in some way, shape, or form. And so it's through that that I'm happy to be sharing with you today what I have put together. I did need to do a little bit of jump starting of my of what I've been doing. I'm only in week 4 with my Thursday night class, and I needed to anticipate 7 weeks worth of curriculum in today's presentation. So needless to say, while I've been focused on a few other things this week, it's been heavy duty Taste of Eternity. And tonight is class night, so I needed to prepare for tonight as well. And so if you're ever interested, this is my website for Spirit of Wellness. You're more than welcome to visit, and I'm always happy to hear from you with regard to your comments and your questions. So what I'd like to do with our time today is to explore the foundational idea of Shabbat Menucha, translated best as Sabbath rest, as a restorative tool for holistic wellness. Now, mind you, I am of a traditional bent, yet I am not on a mission to make anybody Shomer Shabbos or to put anybody in a situation where they feel the need to be defensive about their current Shabbat practices. Everything that I'm attempting to pass along to you today is suggestive in nature, and it's suggestive in the way of being someone who cares about your wellness and would want to give you every opportunity to be able to pursue that. And I'm going to define what I mean by wellness in just a couple of minutes. And really the strategy for this exploration is to examine the development of Shabbat rituals, acknowledge the evolution of new practices, and to broach a discussion of the ultimate Sabbath, quote unquote, ultimate Sabbath, portrayed in mystical thinking, that's really the inspiration for the title, A Taste of Eternity. And if you'd like me to boil down my whole presentation in one sentence, the idea of Shabbat and how we prepare for it and how we keep it is meant to be an incentive towards the ultimate Shabbat that is known as, in Judaism, the world to come. Other traditions refer to it as heaven or as to the next world. But as Jews, we place a minimum of focus. Certainly, we are not obsessed with it, but we think about it, really looking at it to the side. We think of what happens after our days in this world are done, and we are ushered into a greater, more redemptive period. And Shabbat is, the intention and the design of Shabbat is to give you a little preview of that each week. So before I go any further with talking about wellness, I'm going to come back to you where I can see you and as well be able to see any comments that you might have. So as Rebecca said, feel free to jump in at any point. I'll look for hands, but you don't need to feel like you have to stand on ceremony. If there's an idea that comes to the front of your mind, and I've come to the end of a sentence, seize the moment. You are more than welcome to jump in and offer any words that you would like to, whether they're in the form of a comment or a question. What I'd like to do before getting into my presentation is to read a short story. And this story comes from an oldie but goodie book entitled Stories from Our Living Past. My wife, Sue, saw it on the dining room table last night, and she said, "Oh, wow, that brings back such memories." It's really what I call one of the sacred texts of Hebrew school. And I utilized it both as a Hebrew school student and a Hebrew school teacher. And as you're about to find out, its shelf value is infinite. It really doesn't have any kind of terminus to it. And so the title of this story that I'm sharing with you is The Sabbath Spice. One night, the Roman Emperor Antonius was invited by Rabbi Judah to dinner. The two men were good friends. The emperor was a huge, fat man who loved good food as much as anything in his empire. And so the rabbi's cook prepared a wonderful feast with hundreds of different dishes, all steaming hot, fresh, and fragrant. First, the emperor drank 10 bowls of delicately spiced soup. Then he ate a whole roast kid, 5 tender chickens, and a triple helping of wild rice. At last, when his stomach was so full that it rubbed against the edge of the table, he pushed away his plate. "Thank you for this excellent dinner." "Well," Rabbi Judah said, "you must come again on the Sabbath." A few days later, on Friday evening, the emperor came again to Rabbi Judah's house. Because of God's commandment to rest on the Sabbath, The rabbi's cook could not work in the kitchen that night, so she prepared all the food earlier that afternoon. The meal was very simple. There was a platter of roast meat, a bowl of vegetables, and a loaf of bread. For just an instant, the emperor frowned with disappointment. But as he tasted the food, he began to rub his stomach happily. "This food is extraordinary," he cried. "Please, Rabbi, tell me what secret spice your cook uses to make these simple dishes taste so delicious." "It is the spice called the Sabbath," replied Judah. "Then I must have some for the royal kitchen," said the Emperor Antonius. "Please give me a pinch of the Sabbath spice so I can teach my cook to use it." "I am so sorry," smiled the rabbi, "but this spice cannot be given away. Whether or not you have it depends on you. For you see, Your Majesty, the delicious flavor of this meal comes from the delight we take in keeping the Sabbath." And there are variants on that story of how the emperor actually goes home and tries to get his staff to replicate the recipes, and he fails left and right. But I needed to keep it succinct so we could have a little conversation about it, and then, of course, move on to the other things that I've prepared for you today. So we'll open it up for a minute and just ponder the question, what is it, do you think, that makes the Sabbath meal special, whether it's in the context of this story or your own experiences? Floor is open.
I'll just jump in. You know, when I prepare, and it's been a while since I have prepared a Sabbath dinner, it is traditional foods. It's the people that came before me who taught me how to cook those meals. And also there's more time and I think more love that goes into it.
Yeah, I love the idea of history. When we eat something that is curated, the recipe for which is curated, we are bringing to life all of the people and the elements who contributed to it and might have used that recipe in the past. So that's a beautiful way to start. Any other suggestions or thoughts in terms of what does the trick for the Sabbath meal? Let's broaden it a little bit. What are other things that you think make up the spice called the Sabbath? And we don't necessarily have to be limited to food, although I always like to talk about food. And certainly a big piece of Shabbat is the food. What might be some other elements that you know of either the Jewish Sabbath or the Sabbath and other faith traditions that might color it or make it special and unique?
I can offer an idea. I think what makes the Sabbath special is that it differentiates itself from the rest of the week. It sets for a day, it sets it apart, which allows for a moment of reflection, to see that day differently and to view the rest of the week and what one does during that time in a different context.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, either building on Gabriel's suggestion or from your own camp in terms of how you get excited about Shabbat or what the most cherished aspect of Shabbat is to you?
I think of all of the rituals associated, particularly with the Friday night meal and gathering the family together, or celebrating it with friends and saying the Kiddush and making the motzi and everything else that's associated with it.
Mhm.
And then looking forward to and settling in for a day of rest and peace.
Great, great, thank you. both of which have their own life.
Forward to Shabbat for lighting the candles and setting, a little table for myself. When I light the candles, I have a little prayer that I make. It's a poem that relates to my mother, and it's very meaningful to me. And it's the end of a week, and we start anew. And even though we Zoom and don't have people with us physically, it's still, thank goodness for technology, that we can reach out in that way.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Actually, tonight in my weekly class, we're going to speak about the sacred, powerful space of lighting Shabbos candles, which I would argue is the number one most looked forward to moment for a number of people in the Jewish community, because of the way it is contoured and how it can function for people's sense of spirit and identity. What I was going to say in response to Janet is that rest and peace are not always the same. They shouldn't necessarily be conflated, because rest isn't always peaceful and peace isn't always restful. So having both takes a lot of talent.
Hi, this is Christy, and of course I come from like a grafted in faith tradition, but with some similar elements. And I think just it's a day where it reminds me to, I know we try and do it every day, but sort of double down on the gratefulness, reflecting back on like, what did the week have that I can really humble myself and be grateful for, even if it were a hard week, and sort of have a breath before getting ready for the next week, and just praying for like God's anointing on the week to come. But really that grateful piece, even though I try and do it every day, it's kind of shoved in the busyness, and it's easier just to really sort of push myself to go, okay, actually, despite all the ups and downs, there were some ups there, and I'm really grateful for that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Very nice. And I would say that the Jewish response to that is that, well, first of all, I think in my experience, the penultimate statement of gratitude is the bracha, or the blessing. And I think Janet alluded to it in her response. When Jews feel grateful, they're looking for a bracha to say. And I think that, to be fair, for most Jews that you and I come across, all of us, the most number of blessings are recited on Shabbat. Even though we have plenty of opportunity to say blessings during the week, and there is that unwritten credo or ethic of trying to say 100 blessings a day, most of us save the bulk of our blessings for Shabbat, with the motzi and the kiddush and candles and other things. So that rings very true, I think. All right, so I'm going to come back to my screen and talk a little bit about this concept of wellness. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by wellness. Wellness, defined simply, is the pursuit of being our absolute best. It's an active process through which people become aware of and make choices toward a more successful existence. In 1976, Dr. Bill Hetler, co-founder of the National Wellness Institute, developed a model of wellness that included 6 dimensions of health: physical, emotional, social, occupational, intellectual, and spiritual. And I'll just define each one very briefly. Physical wellness encompasses a variety of healthy behaviors, including adequate exercise, proper nutrition, and abstaining from harmful habits such as drug use and alcohol abuse. Emotional wellness is a dynamic state that fluctuates frequently with your other 6 dimensions of wellness. Being emotionally well is typically defined as possessing the ability to feel and express human emotions such as happiness, sadness, and anger. Social wellness refers to our ability to interact successfully in our global community and to live up to the expectations and demands of our personal roles. Occupational wellness, which can also be defined or termed vocational wellness, involves preparing and making use of your gifts, skills, and talents in order to gain purpose, happiness, and enrichment in your life. And I want to make it clear that you don't have to be part of the workforce to be occupationally healthy. You don't have to work full time. You could be retired. You could be on disability. You could be on family leave. These are in no way, or these in no way are blockers or obstacles to being occupationally well. And I think, as we'll discuss, it's so important to tap occupational wellness to get the full value of Shabbat. The intellectual dimension of wellness encourages creative, stimulating mental activities. Our minds need to be continually inspired and exercised just as our bodies do. And spiritual wellness involves possessing a set of guiding beliefs, principles, or values that help give direction in one's life. It encompasses a high level of faith, hope, and commitment to your individual beliefs that provide a series of meaning and purpose. And, being a retired congregational rabbi, I'm liberated to say that you don't have to believe in God to be spiritual. There's lots of ways to access that spiritual wellness without organized religion. Now, don't get me wrong. I think organized religion is a great tool to being spiritually well, but they're not mutually exclusive. And so wellness is the pursuit of continued growth and balance in the 7 dimensions of wellness. And you'll note that I skipped over environmental because later on, a 7th plank known as environmental wellness was added to Dr. Hetler's thesis. And environmental wellness is an awareness of the unstable state of the earth and the effects of your daily habits on the physical environment, which probably, when you think about it, go much closer to 1 o'clock than where it sits at roughly 10 o'clock on the dial here, when you think about what's happening in our world right now. And wellness is, I'd like to impart to you, a full integration of all of these things. An integration of physical, mental, and spiritual well-being, a complex interaction that leads to quality of life. And all too often, we dwell too much on the physical aspect and don't allow ourselves enough time for the other 6 dimensions. And my argument is that Shabbat is a vessel to be able to get all 7 dimensions aired out in the space of our weekly tour through life. And when we talk about the whole notion of Shabbat Menucha, or Sabbath rest, it's not limited to the exhaustion that is caused by 6 days of physical activity, or even 6 days of mental or intellectual activity. It really should incorporate all of the dimensions, and these dimensions are all available to us regardless of some of the restrictions of Shabbat. in terms of that line between work and rest, we still have available to us all of these outlets to be able to celebrate and appreciate life. And so life is a journey of days. There are many ways to be able to create an analogy for our rhythm and our routine, but I've always looked at the long and winding road as my best, most tangible model. And I think that we all come to the experience at some point or another of revisiting roads that we've traveled, whether it's every 10 years, every 50 years, every year, or in the case of Shabbat, every week. And the first depiction of Shabbat in the Hebrew Bible is the culmination of a set of days known as a week. And the way that Genesis chapter 1, which is the primary creation story, is understood is that it's 6 plus 1. There were 6 actively creating days authored by God, in which God spoke the world into existence. And then we find that the 7th day is set aside, where God ceases to create and God rests and hallows the 7th day. And while there are many texts that speak about Shabbat in the Bible, beginning with that primary creation story, and then continuing with both versions of the 10 Commandments, the version that is part of the story of the revelation at Sinai in Exodus chapter 20, and then the re-emergence of that in Deuteronomy, when Moses repeats the 10 Commandments for the new generation, as well as a few places in the book of Leviticus where it is referred to for sacrificial instruction. My favorite place in the first 5 books for understanding Shabbat is right here in Exodus chapter 31. It is known liturgically as the paragraph of the Shamroo, which we sing on Shabbat, both on Friday night and on Saturday morning. And it reads as follows: "Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations, for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed." And I've highlighted 2 phrases that I think are key to understanding the Sabbath. The notion of keeping the Sabbath, which is something that is as much existential as much as it is about rules and regulations, because keeping the Sabbath is not necessarily limited to the 7th day. In order to be able to be present in the Sabbath and to really be ready for the Sabbath, we need to spend some of the previous days getting ready for it, and of course, anticipating it and looking forward to it. And then, if done correctly, and obviously God wouldn't do anything wrong if we're talking about the Bible, the outcome of God's setting aside Shabbat is a sense of refreshment. And we don't have time to talk about the bigger meaning of this, but I will point out to you that the Hebrew of "and was refreshed" is right here, where my cursor is, where my mouse is, vayinafash. And vayinafash sounds a lot like the Hebrew word nefesh, which is one of the terms that we use to refer to the soul. And according to mystical thinking, we all have a soul that God breathed into us. It is the godlike aspect of every human being. But we actually receive a supplementary soul on Shabbat, known as the Neshama Yetera. And so it allows us to elevate all of our activities. And I think that this goes back to the story that that I shared with you, the Sabbath Spice. In many ways, the Sabbath Spice is the Neshama Yetera. It's the element of all things that we do on Shabbat that make them special. Even if it's on paper, it weighs exactly the same, it looks exactly the same on any other day of the week. The fact that we're doing it in the context of Shabbat makes it ipso facto special. Now, hand in hand with Shamroo, Exodus chapter 31, verses 13 and 14, my favorite passage about Shabbat in the writings of the prophets is Isaiah chapter 58, verses 13 and 14. I hope you all appreciate that my two favorite passages in the Hebrew Bible are short, because I don't know about you, but if I see something long and lengthy, it turns me off right away. So I'm looking to find something short and substantive that I can really sink my teeth into. And in that chapter, which is also read as the Haftorah on Yom Kippur morning, we find the words, "If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your affairs on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath delight," the Hebrew word for delight is oneg, "the Lord's holy day honor, and if you honor by not going on your own way, nor strike bargains, nor speak idle words, then you can seek the favor of the Lord. I will set you astride the heights of the earth and let you enjoy the heritage of your father Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." So this is a big deal. This is one of the weightiest if-then statements in all of biblical literature. And it pretty much sets us up to understand that God is a big player in our keeping of Shabbat, that there is something in it for God that has its own separate life from the wellness value of Shabbat for us. And that's a totally different presentation. But I share this text with you because I am enamored with this whole concept of the delight of Shabbat, and hopefully this brings back memories for all of you, oneg Shabbat in Hebrew. That is the way that we play out this dictum of prophetic teaching. Now, there are a few different places in rabbinic literature where the rabbis attempt to define what Isaiah means by oneg Shabbat, or the delight of the Sabbath. And again, for the interests of time, I am going to limit to one of those texts. This is from the Babylonian Talmud tractate Shabbat, page 113a. And I'll read very quickly through it. The Gemara cites what we learned with regard to the following passage. If you keep your feet from breaking, from pursuing your affairs on my holy day, and you call Shabbat a delight, the Lord's holy day honorable, and you honor it by not going your own way, from attending to your affairs and speaking idle words. That's what the passage that I just read in the previous slide. Here comes the explanation. The rabbis derive from the words, and you honor it, that your dress on Shabbat should not be like your dress during the week. As Rabbi Yochanan would refer to his clothing as my honor, indicating that appropriate clothing is a form of deference. The words going on your own way mean that your walking on Shabbat should not be like you're walking during the week. From attending to your affairs means it is prohibited to deal with your weekday affairs and to speak about them on Shabbat. However, the affairs of heaven, that is, those pertaining to mitzvot, are permitted. And I ran out of space here. Basically, the whole idea of speaking idle words means that we should be especially on guard about how we speak and the way that we address other people on Shabbat, because the prophet turned it into a moral teaching that by rights, idle words, lashon hara, empty speech, are not good any day of the week, but especially on Shabbat, we should be mindful of the fact that we need to speak with kindness, with health, with meaning, and with purpose. So let me just stop there and see if there are any comments. Is there anything about these texts that I've shared with you that might give you a spark of inspiration as to what else Shabbat can be besides what you knew about it before? Or how you might be introduced to something different about Shabbat that hasn't been part of your practice, or maybe hasn't been part of your practice in a while? Is Shabbat supposed to be a heavy, weighty, costly enterprise for us? Is that, I mean, a cynic could say that it is, but based on the texts that we've seen, is that what the purpose of Shabbat is? Is that how it's being dealt to us by the Torah and by the prophet Isaiah? I would argue that it isn't. I would argue that it is one of the most inexpensive, easy to access ways of taking care of ourselves that we can possibly run across. Now, don't get me wrong, one needs to have resources and awareness and knowledge to be able to do it. But having said that, it is something that allows, that is sustainable and doable and allowable wherever we are in life, wherever we are geographically. It's very portable. It's very adaptable. You know, even though the standard definition of Shabbat, Shabbat's duration is 25 hours from sunset on Friday to Saturday night at dusk. The fact of the matter is that many Jews have to work it into a bigger platform of being and existence. I think the more that we are able to block out that interference, the better, because we're all entitled to 1/7 of the week to take care of ourselves and to be with our wellness and our community. But that doesn't mean that Shabbat can't be accommodated if that's prohibitive. And I think those of us who were and are part of the working world know that it's not always possible to be able to make 25 hours in our week for Shabbat. Thanks for that comment, Rebecca. Anybody else before I move on?
I don't know, Rabbi Gerson, if you're going to do this, but do you have a personal example you could share, like for you, how it is meaningful? Or maybe you're going to do this later, but just a small example that you could share?
Absolutely. I appreciate your mentioning it. So my Shabbat the last 2 years has been radically different from the Shabbat that I knew for the previous 30. because for the previous 30, I was a congregational rabbi, and it was my job to facilitate Shabbat for my congregants and my students, and to teach them about it and to lead through example, which meant that most weeks I worked on Shabbat. And that was not the healthiest. I won't say that it wasn't a labor of love. It was truly a labor of love. And I tried to incorporate things in my 2 congregations, the first in New Jersey, the very early part of my career, and then in Denver at Road of Shalom for 25 years, that would allow me to get excited about Shabbat because of the novelty of the activities. So just, to give you for instance, what we did once a month at the end of Kiddush, the social hour following services, was we did something called the Rabbi's Tish, where we all sat around a configuration of tables and engaged in spirits that came out of a bottle, but also spirits that came out of our mouths. We sang, we shared Torah, and it was a self-select group, never more than 20 people at any one time that I did it over the course of 5 years. But it was a way of inviting people to get into it in a way that they might not be able to on their own. And it had a lot of the elements that I spoke about of wellness, right? There was the physical, there was the spiritual, there was the social, there was the intellectual. And so I think that's one aspect. And certainly we can catalyze that during worship services as well. But worship services, as great as they are, and as powerful as they are in all faith traditions, they tend to be 1 or 2 dimensional. Words, music, you can't really get into more than that in the course of a worship service in ways that you can in other Shabbat activities. The way that I would typify it in my post-rabbi life, I still consider myself a rabbi. They can't take that away from me unless I do something really, really bad. I can't be defrocked that way. I don't even have to keep a license, which is kind of a neat thought. Never had to. But in this next chapter of my life, there's a much clearer dichotomy between what I do the other days of the week and what I do on Shabbat. And I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about what I refrain from doing on Shabbat. It's what I look forward to doing on Shabbat. It's setting the table in my dining room. It's the meals that I plan together with my wife. It's the long walks that I take either on my own or with my wife. That the time of Shabbat, the boundless time of Shabbat, allows me to do. It's until 9 months ago, it's the time to be together with my community when I choose to. That's another neat thing about not being a congregational rabbi. I can be at services whenever I want and show up whenever I want. I want you to know, and God is my witness, most times it's at the beginning or close to the beginning of services, unless, of course, I'm going from one shul to another, which is also my privilege as a retired rabbi. But it's having that opportunity to commune with the people in my affinity group and to be able to catch up on things that time during the week doesn't allow me to do. So that's a little bit of a taste. And if I were to wax about what it was like when my children were growing up, that would be a whole nother dimension, because there's the whole idea of blessing the children and allowing the children to be present in so many of those ceremonies that we do, that we've talked about and we've made. So thanks for the question. The last part, what I was going to hopefully have time to do, and we talked about this a lot in my Thursday night class, is what these last 6 or 7 months have done to us in terms of social isolation from our communities, and how Zoom has presented itself, or live stream has presented itself as a way of staying connected with our communities. And there are many different schools of thought about that, and we had a very healthy conversation about it in my class. It sounds like, based on the introductions and the conversation we had earlier in this hour, several of you have taken advantage of that. And I think that's a very good thing. It's really important to be able to keep that ball high in the air in terms of not getting so abnormal that we don't know where we belong. So I think that technology has afforded us an opportunity to be a part of community. And if we find it not appropriate for Shabbat, we can use the other days of the week, as we're doing right now, to be able to connect with others, to grow, and to be more well in our being. So I'm moving now to 2 pieces of liturgy, one which I'm not going to read, and the second which I am going to read, which speak to the holiness of rest. That the enterprise of Shabbat Menucha, of staying away from some of those behaviors and work that are typical of the first 6 days of the week, and focusing instead on rest, which is not necessarily passive, as I've tried to explain, but it can be very active. It's through oneg, it's through celebration, it's through food, it's through activity, it's through song. There's something very desirable about that, and if we do it, consistently, it's something that can be very holy and sacrosanct. But in the grace after meals, Birkat Hamazon, that we intone on all the days of the week, there's a special edition on Shabbat, right here at the bottom of the screen. Harachaman hu yanchilenu yom shekulo shabbatu mnucha lechaye ha'olamim. The all-merciful God, may you let us inherit a day that shall be holy a Sabbath and rest in life everlasting. So notice it's no longer holy, H-O-L-Y. It's holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y. Shabbat goes from being a special thing once a week, that's 1/7 of our existence, to being all pervasive, where we know a perpetual version of the celebration and the rest that we enjoy once a week on Shabbat. And that meditation stems from a few places in the tradition, 2 of which are on the screen now. In Talmud Brachot, we see 5 things are a 60th part of something else, namely fire, honey, Shabbat, sleep, and a dream. Fire is 1/60th part of Gehenna. Gehenna is the Jewish equivalent of hell. Honey is 1/60th part of manna. Manna was the heavenly bread that fell while the Jews were in the desert for 40 years. Shabbat is 1/60th part of the world to come. Come back to that in a minute. Sleep is 1/60th part of death, and a dream is 1/60th part of prophecy. And then we move to a late midrash from a collection called Otiot de Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva is a famous rabbi. It wasn't written by him, but it's attributed to him. In the hour God said to Israel, I am giving you the Torah, God said, if you observe the mitzvah, that is the commandment of Shabbat, I will give you Olam Haba, the world to come. And Israel said before God, Master of the universe, show us an example of this Olam Haba. God replied, this is Shabbat. And Rabbi Theodore Friedman, who was a great rabbi in the conservative movement for much of the 20th century, wrote a very interesting article entitled Shabbat as Preview of the Perfected World. And he alludes to these texts and more. And he basically says, in sum, the Sabbath can be for modern man the expression of his cosmic dimension, the faith that he is more than a creature of time, the faith that his true but as yet unfulfilled nature is to be found in his solidarity with the human family and his affinity to the eternal, the faith that in enjoying the world and God, he fulfills his true destiny in time and eternity. And I would footnote to those eloquent words, Shabbat is a paean, right? It's a paragon, if you will, to the ethic of taking good care of ourselves. Something that shouldn't be limited to the seventh day, but we utilize the resource of the seventh day to be able to block out all the obstacles to our wellness and to feed that wellness through the rituals and celebration of Sabbath keeping. And if we invest in it, the dividend is to ultimately get it back when it's all that we possibly know, which is a huge idea. It's super rational. It's hard to believe it could ever take place, but that's what faith is all about, is that we are investing in something greater that's bigger than we can imagine. I just want to address the question from Janet in the chat. The Hebrew for Yom Shekulo, the Hebrew for a holy, an entire holy Sabbath is Yom Shekulo Shabbatu Mnucha, right? A day that's wholly composed of Sabbath and rest, that every day is comprised of Sabbath and rest. And so that's my endorsement of Shabbat in 55 minutes or less. And I do have to, unfortunately, get to a meeting at 2 o'clock, but I do want to thank you all for your indulgence in listening to me and allowing me to air out these ideas. Please do feel free to visit the Spirit of Wellness, where we can engage in more conversation. And I do want to thank Kavod for inviting me to have this hour with you all. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and Shabbat Shalom to all of you as we get ready for this week's round of Sabbath.